All right, this is for the young people, and that includes those of us that are young at heart as well. I had hoped to bring some popcorn for this morning's message to share, but of course with the pandemic and everything going on, that's probably not the most advisable thing to do, so I decided not to. And so I'll just use it. We'll just imagine that we have some popcorn with us this morning. So think about popcorn. Everybody likes popcorn, right? You probably don't want it all the time, but it's something that's nice to have. Maybe when you're watching a movie or something, you go to the theater, you like to get that movie theater popcorn that has the fake butter on it that we all love so much. But what are some of the things that you like to put on your popcorn? Salt? How many of us like salt on our popcorn? Almost all of us. Okay. How many of us like butter on our popcorn? Almost all of us. Okay. Anything else that you like to put on your popcorn? Caramel. Caramel's good. Any others? Cheese. Yeah. Okay, so there's lots of things we put on our popcorn, but the one thing that, if you're going to add anything to your popcorn, the one thing that almost everybody puts on it is salt. Now, why do you think that is? What does salt do? It does what?
Makes you drink more pop.
Makes you drink more pop. Okay, now that's exactly why the theaters put the salt on it. I'll get to that in a second. Any other reasons? Why do you like salt on your popcorn?
It enhances the flavor.
Enhances the flavor. Yeah. Any others? I think that pretty much covers the bases why we do it. But you just alluded to this. Why do you think that the pop costs more in theaters than the popcorn does? Because the salt on the popcorn makes you thirsty. And so if they mark the popcorn cheaper, then you're likely going to buy the popcorn with the salt. And what's that going to do? It's going to make you thirsty. And so they don't let you bring in your outside drinks. So that means you're going to buy the more expensive beverages to go with it. It's the same thing with salt water in the ocean. It dehydrates you. That's why you don't drink the salt water. They tell you if you're going to drink water when you're out to sea or whatever, don't drink the salt water. Drink pure water that you bring with you that's bottled or perhaps in some sort of container. If we eat more popcorn in the theaters, then we buy more drinks. It's the same thing with peanuts. You know, if you go to a bar, a lot of times they have the peanuts sitting out on the tray for people to have for free. That's because they're salty. They'll make you thirsty. And then, of course, you buy the drinks that are more expensive. If popcorn is salty, then you'll want more. Now, a little bit of salt makes it taste good. It's not bland anymore, and that's what Naomi alluded to. I think about the other day, Mom had fixed a nice dinner, had some peas and potatoes and stuff like that, and I was putting a little bit of salt and pepper on my peas, and she said, "You don't have to do that." She said, "I'll always put salt in it." But I wanted a little bit more salt. And so sometimes you want to add a little bit more salt to something, but you always seem to want to at least use some salt in your cooking, unless you've got some sort of medical reason why you don't want to use salt. Then you use some sort of salt substitute for that flavoring. But when you cook, you use a little bit of salt, or maybe a lot of salt. But it's because of that it enhances the flavor. And so it makes it so it's not bland anymore. Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth." And so when he's telling us to be the salt of the earth, he's telling us to be like the salt on that popcorn, or the salt on our food that makes it more appealing, that makes it people want to eat more of it. You don't want to eat it if it's bland. You don't want to eat it if it doesn't taste good. And it's the same way with when we're sharing Jesus or sharing our faith, or just living our lives around people, sharing with them our lives so that they may see our lives, that it would attract them to want to have what we have, relationship with Jesus. And so when we share Jesus, they'll want more of him. So if we want to be salty or be like salt, the salt of the earth, then Jesus is telling us to act in a way and to share our faith in a way that will make people want to be around us more and will want to be with Jesus and to know more about him. All right, our scripture this morning is from Matthew chapter 5. It's on page 1501 in your pew Bible. Page 1501. Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. Matthew 5:13. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. Leviticus chapter 2, verse 13 says to season all your grain offerings with salt. This is an instruction that God gave to the Israelites. And he also said to add salt to all of your offerings. So when they were offering their offerings to God, he wanted them to add salt to it. Now why would he want them to do that? Numbers 18, verse 19 describes a covenant of salt between God and the Israelites. Now, as we talk about this morning's message, I think you're going to get a picture of why God would want to make a covenant of salt with his people. But there are many different characteristics of salt. Can anybody give me some characteristics of salt other than flavoring? Yeah, for snow. It melts the snow. Rock salt. Any others?
Making ice cream.
Making ice cream.
It preserves.
It's a preservative, yes. All right, any others? Okay, John mentioned a preservative, especially before we had refrigeration. If you can remember back in those days, or maybe your parents, you remember them telling you about what it was like back before we had refrigeration, used salt as a preservative. It would stop decay and extend the life of food. It would keep the food from spoiling or rotting. And so the same way, like John said, as salt is a preservative, God wants us to have salt in our lives to preserve us, to stop our moral decay, to extend or to save our lives, to keep us from becoming spoiled, rotten. You know, you think about correction or discipline with your children. Why do you do that? To keep them from becoming spoiled, right? You know, you correct your children so that they don't become spoiled like meat. When meat gets spoiled, it's no longer good. And so that's one of the things that salt, not a literal, but in a proverbial sense, salt in our lives helps to keep us from spoiling like meat. It preserves us. It also cures and heals. You know, people have cured meat with salt. And, you know, maybe you remember some of your parents, grandparents maybe told you when you had a sore throat to use some hot salt water. So let's still do that today. If you have a sore throat, why get out the medicine? Why go to the drugstore and spend a bunch of money on that? Just get a little bit of hot salt water and put that on your throat. And that helps to cure a sore throat. Jesus came as a healer. He healed the sick and told his disciples to do the same. So we are to work to heal the world. That's another way that we want to use salt, proverbially, in our lives. The greatest disease the world faces is sin. You know, of course, we've got disease all around us today. We've got a major one that we're dealing with right now all around the world. But a disease, an illness that is much greater than that is the disease of sin. It's been with us since the beginning of time, and it's something that is going to be with us till the end of time, until Jesus comes back himself personally and removes it. And we think about what a wonderful day that's going to be, when there's no more sin, no more pain, no more suffering. We won't have to worry about cancer. We won't have to worry about coronavirus. We won't have to worry about broken bones, about illnesses, things that put us in the hospital, things that make us sick, things that make us sad, depressed, lonely. All these things will be gone when Jesus returns. And but sin is the one disease that has always been with us and is more deadly than any other disease that this world has ever faced or ever will face. And it not only leads to physical death, but spiritual death as well. So as in Jesus' example, we need not to only heal the physically ill, but the spiritually ill. When he said he didn't come to heal the well, he came to heal those that are sick, those that are ill. The physician comes to heal not those that don't need a doctor, but those that do. Not those that are well, but those that are having illnesses in their lives, disease, pain, suffering. In the same way, Jesus came to heal the sick spiritually. And so that's part of what salt does in our lives as well. To not only treat the flesh, but more importantly, the soul. Now, we think a lot about Jesus doing his miracles. A lot of people place high emphasis on those. And, that was a really extravagant, a really powerful thing to imagine seeing him healing the sick, raising the dead. Can you imagine if we saw that today? Somebody just touched somebody with their hand and a dead body, and it just comes back to life? If we saw that today, that would be an amazing thing. But Jesus said at one point, he said, is it more impressive, and I'm paraphrasing here, is it more impressive to say your body is healed or your sins are forgiven? When you think about it, it's more impressive to heal the soul than to save a life, to heal the body. And that's what Jesus came to do. He did both, but more importantly than healing the body was healing our souls. And so that's another part of being salty in our lives, is to help heal souls. Now, how do we do that? The title of my message this morning is Let's Get Salty. Now, when you think of somebody being salty, what do you think of? When somebody's salty, they're offensive, right? Like you think of a drunken sailor gets salty. That's the old parable. When somebody gets salty, they use foul language maybe. They do things that are offensive. They say things that are offensive. Well, sometimes salt can be offensive. And sometimes people are offended by the gospel. In the New Testament, it talks about there will come a time when people will be offended by the Word of God. There will come a time when people will turn away from the truth and they will follow a lie because the lie is more appealing. And honestly, I believe we're in those days right now where the world around us, sometimes ourselves included, it's easier and more appealing to believe the lie than it is to believe the truth, because the lie is more comforting. So sometimes we need to be offended by the gospel. Salt stings open wounds. And why does that happen? Why does it sting an open wound? Because it's healing it. In order to heal it, it has to sting it first. So sometimes, we want God to fix our lives, and we want Him to heal us, we want Him to make things better. But sometimes it's a rough process that we have to go through to get to the point to where we can be healed. We have to let that wound sting a little bit before it can fully heal. Talk about the potter with the clay. Before the clay can be remolded, it has to be broken. In the same way, we have to have ourselves be broken spiritually before God can heal us and remold us into the perfect clay pot that He wants us to be. Otherwise, we're always going to have that cracked structure on the inside, and it's never going to be completely whole. It's never going to be firm and solid. And so we have to be broken before we can be healed. And we get offended, and we resist the correction. Now, a lot of people reject God in the church today because they're offended by what they perceive as the church being judgmental. And I've talked about this many times in the past. They feel like the church has already condemned them, so they may as well live it up. Now, I've talked before about the Brantley Gilbert song you've probably heard on the radio, where he says, might as well just live it up. And, he says the world's judging him already, so you might as well just go ahead and do it. There's another country song that says, everybody's talking about us, spreading false rumors, so let's give them something to talk about. That's the wrong attitude to have. And it's easy to do that. Well, if somebody thinks I'm going to live like this, then I'm going to go ahead and live like this. Just to, I might as well because everybody thinks I'm doing it already. Well, we don't want to give into that because that's temptation. That's giving in and becoming what they believe us to be. We need to be sure that we are not pushing people away from God, but drawing them to Him. Salt stings, but that's not its purpose. We're not salting wounds in order to torture sinners, but to heal them. So we can't lose sight of that, or else we will become what they think of us. Remember many years, probably 10, 15, 20 years ago now, the Westboro Baptist Church was big in the news because they were going around and they were protesting all these different things that they disagreed with. And a lot of those things were things that we disagree with as well. But the way that they presented their message was in a way that was very offensive, and it didn't draw people to Jesus, it pushed them away. And by taking on that attitude, the way in which they presented their beliefs, they didn't draw hardly anybody to their cause. All they did was push people farther and farther away. So we need to be careful that we are not taking on strategies that emulate that push people away like they did. So when we witness to the world, we want to cause a thirst for Christ and for righteousness. Like I mentioned about salt, it causes thirst. That's why they put it on the popcorn in the theaters. And the Beatitudes, which we've been going through recently, said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." That's Matthew 5, verse 6. So if we present the gospel or the good news properly, it will make people thirst for more, just like popcorn in the movie theater. And like the woman at the well, remember that story? The woman was drawn from the well and Jesus showed up. Just like that woman at the well, they will want more of the living water, the bread of life that Jesus offered her. And when she offered him to drink, he said, if you had the water I have, you would not thirst anymore. You would not want this water. And she said, Lord, give me this water so that I may never thirst again. Give me this bread of life so that I may never again hunger. We want to lead people with that desire for the living water, the bread of life, so that they will be drawn to him, not pushed away. So how do we give the correction of the gospel in a way that causes that thirst? Well, we present it in a way that's appealing. Now, as we said, salt is a seasoning or a flavoring. It makes things taste good. I've talked to you before about my band Crusade. And our mission, the way we perceived it, was that we were going to go out from church to church, from social to social, from fair, or wherever we were asked to go sing. We would present the gospel through our music, through the lyrics, but we would do it in a format that would be appealing to the audience. And that would be the style of music. If you're going to play in front of an audience like we have out in our community where a lot of them like country music, you might present your music in a southern gospel or in a country musical style, or bluegrass or something along those lines. You go to the inner city, you might do rap music or hip hop, or you go to some other big cities, you might do the rock or the metal or whatever it is. You do it in a way that draws their attention, but you present it in an unwavering, uncompromising way. You present your message. So you do it in a way that's appealing. You don't compromise your message, but you present it in a way that gets the audience's attention, and you get the message across and leave them wanting more. Jesus says we are the salt of the earth. So salt is valuable. This is another characteristic of salt. It's valuable for all the reasons that we just talked about. It's so valuable that it's been used historically as a currency. In fact, it was used to pay Roman soldiers' wages in biblical times. But even as recently as the Civil War, salt was a critical resource. And it's where we get the phrase today that somebody is worth his salt, is because it was valuable. It was used in some instances as a currency. But Jesus warns, if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. And that brings us to example, another one of you mentioned, rock salt. I think it was Naomi that mentioned the rock salt. You put it on the steps in the wintertime. And there was one time, you guys told me the story before I started preaching here about the time somebody fell down the steps here, the Santa Claus the one year. There's also been times in the winter that we've had people slip outside on the icy concrete. And so that's why we put out the salt, is to make it solid and to keep people from falling on that. So if we're to be the salt of the earth, we should help others to stand on their feet on solid ground, the solid rock of Jesus Christ, our firm foundation. But salt can also have a negative connotation too. Deuteronomy 29 verse 23, for example, warns that a land with God's judgment upon it will be like a burning waste of salt and sulfur. Nothing planted, nothing sprouting, no vegetation growing on it. It will be like the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboiim, which the Lord overthrew in fierce anger. Now, in ancient times, when they wanted to pronounce judgment on a city, they would scatter salt over it. This would ruin the ground, making it barren and unable to produce any vegetation. And there's an example of that in Judges 9, verse 45. Now, it's interesting, in this verse 23 up here that I just read to you, it mentions Sodom and Gomorrah. Since we remember from that story, as Lot and his family left the town, God warned them not to look back. But Lot's wife did, and what did she turn into? A pillar of salt. And that's in Genesis 19, verse 26. God in his judgment provided the salt that would scatter all across the city, symbolizing his judgment over it and making it barren. And so when she turned that pillar of salt, that was symbolic of the judgment that God was placing on the city. And by looking back, she was choosing to be part of that judgment. This serves as a reminder not to lose our saltiness, our service to God's kingdom. Otherwise, we, like Lot's wife, would be good for nothing except to be thrown out like rock salt and trampled underfoot. As Luke 14:35 says, it is fit neither for the soil nor for the manure pile. So salt becomes useless when it's contaminated, and it can't even be used for fertilizer. So imagine literally being worth less than manure. That's pretty much what Luke was saying here in this passage. It has no value anymore except to be used as rock salt. So let's be sure to remain pure and uncontaminated, useful for God's kingdom. Let us draw people to God by sharing the good news of the gospel in a way that's appealing yet uncompromising. Then God can heal their wounds and preserve them for his kingdom. Have salt among yourselves, Jesus says in Mark 9:50, and be at peace with each other. And in Colossians 4, verse 6, let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. So, there's many different things that we can learn about being salty. And so when Jesus talks about we are the salt of the earth, let's try to remember these different examples of how we need to be appealing to the world, but in a way that's uncompromising, a way that draws them to Jesus and doesn't push them away, either with falsehoods that mislead them or with things that are just simplified to the point to where it leads them astray.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching today's program. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe so that you'll know when we add new videos. If you'd like to join us in person, we're at the Highland Ridge Community Church at 2200 Highland Ridge Road, Lowell, Ohio, 45744. We'd love to have you join us. Our Sunday morning services are at 9 o'clock a.m. every Sunday morning. In the meantime, you can find us online. Just search your social media for the keyword Pastor Kevin, HRCC. That's Pastor Kevin, HRCC. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching, and God bless.